The Scream Kings are in no way responsible for any encounters with the paranormal, extraterrestrial abductions, eldritch insanity, hauntings, curses, hexes, demonic possessions, cryptozoological sightings, or any loss of sleep that results from listening to this podcast.
This is the Scream Kings podcast. I'm Nathaniel Darkish. And just because it's a podcast doesn't mean it can't have a decapitation or two. Today I am having to excuse my usual co-host, Max. He is dealing with all of the fun life stuff that sometimes pops up. But in his place, I have a very special guest, Brian McAuley, and I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit there, Brian.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. My name is Brian McAuley. I wrote the novel Curse of the Reaper, which is a meta-slasher Hollywood horror novel, and it tells a story of Howard Browning, who's an actor who played a slasher in the 80s, and then when they reboot his film without him, he fights to get the role back and starts to kind of become the character that he played for all those years.
And it's extremely good.
Oh, thank you.
just if anyone was like, "Oh, that's a cool pitch. I wonder if that's any good." Yeah, it's really good.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I've worked in Hollywood for the last decade or so as a screenwriter, so I've definitely kind of channeled a lot of my experience and perhaps some frustrations with the Hollywood system into this book to try to really bring it to life.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could really take on, any of your, or take out all of your frustrations in this particular book. It's you don't shy away from getting bloody when you need to.
It's very, very cathartic for sure.
But yeah, I met Brian at StokerCon earlier this year. We hit it off, hung out with a bunch of the same people, had dinner together, and at the time, Curse the Reaper hadn't come out yet, but he told me about it, and I knew, I got to get him to send me that so we can have him on the podcast. And I have to say, my read of it was, you always have the experience that you hope that, like, people you meet, that people that you become friends with, that their writing is good, and so you can just, like, shamelessly plug them. And I'm very glad to report that I don't have to, like, oh yeah, it's my friend, so I have to say nice things. Like, genuinely loved it. Great read all the way through. And I mean, I'm not the only one who's saying that. I mean, you're getting great reviews all over the place. I was just looking at the publisher page just on Simon & Schuster, and oh yeah, you just have, like, blurbs from Esquire and Library Journal, and lots of other writers like Clay McLeod and Jamie Flanagan, who we just barely had on the show, and just no big deal, just all these big exciting buzzy things being said about your book. It's just showing up on all of these best of horror lists. So everyone should read this book.
Thank you.
If you like this podcast, you will like this book.
I appreciate it. It's been a real wonderful journey. I feel like StokerCon was a huge kind of turning point moment for me, because, as you said, the book was not out yet, and I went with some bookmarks and just wanted to connect with other horror folk, writers and podcasters and everybody in the horror community. And I was, I went into it with a little bit of imposter syndrome of just like, what am I, I haven't done anything yet, even though I have done, as imposter syndrome works, that's not actually true. I've written a bunch of film and TV projects and was actually invited to speak on some panels, which was great. So I got to meet Jamie on a panel and speak alongside Grady Hendrix and all of that. But the best part was just getting to hang with people kind of in between panels, as you described, with like grabbing food and just talking about all our favorite horror books and movies. And it was really a great way for me to kind of really feel like I found my people and get some fun feedback from people as I pitch them the book. And it's been great. It came out October 4th, so it's still just about 2 months old now. So still in the kind of early wave of the release. But it's been, so far the response has really been, it's been wonderful. It definitely, I have gotten more out of the book release than any of my film and TV projects in terms of feeling that sense of kind of creative gratification that you always hope for, I think.
Yeah, and I love too that you're not just resting on your laurels here. Just on Twitter, yesterday, day before, you also were announcing some other projects coming up in the horror book sphere.
Yes, I will be doing a novella through Shortwave Publishing, and it will be coming out next winter because it is a Christmas horror novella. It is a slasher entitled Candy Cane Kills, and that's CAIN. And I'm thrilled. I had a blast writing this. Curse of the Reaper is very much psychological horror, character-driven, mashed up with the slasher elements. And the novella is going to be, about half the length, maybe even less than half the length of a traditional novel, as novellas tend to be, and be a kind of one-night slasher story that I think is going to be a bit more kind of full tilt in the madness and the slasher of it all. So it's been really fun to play, still in the slasher realm, but do a different kind of story.
Well, then we'll just have to have you back talking some sort of, Christmas horror thing when that comes out, because I'm already stoked to read it.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, that'll be awesome.
Yeah, I love horror novellas. I think the novella is an underappreciated gem that I think especially works with horror, right? Like, this like quick, you read it in one, maybe 2 nights, and you get like a complete spooky story without having the kind of sometimes underwhelming experience that you get with like a short story. Yeah. But it's just so digestible and quick and punchy that's I love novellas.
Yeah, this has definitely been the year that I kind of fell in love with that form, and I read some real great ones that I was just like, oh wow, this is not just like about a writer working themselves up to a novel and doing like, I'll start with a short story, then do a novella, then do a novel. Like, no, it's a very specific form that certain stories are just better suited for. And I think that a slasher is one of them, where you can kind of, you don't have to pad it out, and you can kind of make a lean, mean story like that. And it's especially, as you say, like horror, the way that, one or 2 nights and you're done with it really can kind of have more of an impact sometimes, the way that it's just a bit of a gut punch.
Yeah. I mean, and especially with slashers, you notice that most slashers are, a tight 90 minutes, right? And not these sprawling 4-hour epics. Not that you couldn't pull that off, but I think a lot of times it's the kind of story that the quick digestible version is the best version, because it's lean and mean. So switching gears a little bit, one thing that we always have our guests do is share what is their favorite horror, whether that's movies, books, TV shows, video games, I don't know, whatever you want to talk about as some of your favorite horror pieces.
I think a movie that really, The Exorcist is one I keep coming back to, which feels almost like I feel lame citing it because it's such an iconic one. But I was raised Catholic, went to a Catholic school, and I think that it really resonated for that reason. And it also, I love it because William Peter Blatty is both a screenwriter and a filmmaker and a novelist, and I really enjoyed getting, reading the screenplay of it, reading the book, watching the movie, and then, Exorcist 3 and the book Legion, like to get to see somebody who is playing in all of those forms in different ways. There's just something about that really resonates with me in particular.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, yes, it might be kind of a common answer to say that The Exorcist is your favorite, but I mean, I think it's has that staying power because it is so well constructed, right? Like, they pulled out all the stops, they gave incredible performances, and really were meticulous in how it was written as well as how it was directed and just created from every angle. So The Exorcist is incredible.
Yeah, and it also, I think it resonates with kind of my approach to Curse the Reaper. Like Nat Cassidy recently, the author of Mary, An Awakening of Terror, which is an exquisite novel, debut novel from this year. He read Curse the Reaper and said nice things about it on Twitter. But he was specifically talking about, the kind of stories where they're just good stories and there also is horror, that it's not just like stapled on, but it's built into it. But also, the character drama really resonates in a way that it's almost like you don't need the horror, but of course you want the horror, and the horror is also important. But I think that that's what The Exorcist is for me, like this priest who is struggling with his faith and doesn't know whether he can keep going on in this profession, and this mother who's deeply worried about her daughter and doesn't know what's wrong with her and doesn't know what else to do. There's just this like really human desperation in these two characters that I think those are my favorite horror movies, because for me the emotion of horror comes from being rooted in empathy and love and the good feelings. That's what you need in order to feel the opposite of like the true like earth-shattering horror, and I think Exorcist does that really well.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. And I love that some of the most horrifying moments are some of the more theoretically mundane things, right? Like the medical tests and stuff that they're running honestly are some of the more horrifying moments in the film, over spider crawling and puking pea soup.
Yeah, that's so true.
And that definitely speaks to the power of that human element of it. Yeah, I agree. Like, good horror is almost always about humanity first, and being able to connect with humanity before it gets into the demonic or the supernatural or things like that. Not that we don't need both, but a lot of the best horror gives us both in such a satisfying way.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, outside of that being your favorite horror, then we also like to ask, what is the scariest movie, book, TV show, whatever, that you have encountered?
The movie that when I was back in my like teenage years, when I was just like in that phase of trying to watch every horror movie I could find, and just burning through them and to varying degrees of impact, the movie that I had to press stop and like turn on the lights was The Thing. It remains, the John Carpenter's The Thing remains one of my favorite all-time movies, incredibly rewatchable. I admire new things in it every time I watch it. But when I first watch it as a teenager by myself in the basement with the lights off, the defibrillator scene when the man's chest opens up and just chomps the other guy's arms off and then the head disconnects, I had to like stop and like take a breather because I was so overwhelmed and was not expecting any of it. And I still, like I said, every time I watch it, I'm just in awe of the effects, of the intense paranoia. It's just exquisite.
Oh, yes. Oh, The Thing is definitely top tier horror. Like, I don't know. I don't get how that movie was not a smash hit when it came out. But
yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, it speaks to how nothing really ever makes sense in Hollywood, but yeah.
Yeah. But that is a whole other, episode worth of discussion. Like,
Yes.
why The Thing is one of the best movies ever, and why everyone who didn't give it its due when it came out is dumb.
Yeah.
Though, interestingly enough, I think today, was kind of moving on to our big movie discussion. Mm-hmm. We're going to be dealing with another horror movie that I personally think also maybe never has gotten quite the level of respect it maybe warrants. And you're, of course, welcome to disagree with me. But we are going to be discussing New Nightmare, the 1994 film written and directed by Wes Craven, the 7th entry in the Nightmare on Elm Street series.
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess right off the bat, do you feel like this one is underappreciated?
I do. I think that because it came out 2 years before Scream, it kind of got overshadowed in terms of being a brilliant meta horror movie. And I like, I just revisited it today, and it had a huge impact on me. And it was a huge influence on Curse of the Reaper. But I haven't revisited it in probably decades, to be honest. I don't think I've revisited it since my teenage years. And yeah, that I think rewatching it for the purpose of discussing it really hit home. Like, I don't know, I just feel Wes Craven in it in a way that just, it's so clever and endearing, and there's a sincerity to it that I really appreciate. And yeah, it's just like, really, what a concept. Like, it's really, he just fucking went for it. And I feel like more and more those are the movies that I appreciate are the ones that take the big swings. And it's wild to me that this was now almost 30 years ago. Like, what a bold fucking thing to do. And of course he couldn't have done it if it wasn't attached to like a giant successful franchise where Bob Shea at New Line, who's also in this movie, was probably going to greenlight any Freddy type of idea no matter what. But like, good on Wes Craven for being like, then I'm going to do something really wild and personal and totally different. And that in and of itself deserves more respect, I think. Yeah,
I agree with everything you just said. And yeah, what I love about this one, maybe even over Scream in some ways, though, I mean, at the end of the day, I think Scream might be, my preference out of those two films.
Yeah.
Regardless, though, what I love about this one, as a meta horror film, is that it is such a, like, honestly, just bat crap crazy idea, right? Like, hey, let's take the entire cast, basically, of the original film in this enormously successful series and do a horror movie about the popularity of that series creating, basically making the monster real. And we're going to have all of these actors playing themselves. Like, that's, and Wes Craven is playing himself, and Bob Shea is playing himself. Like, it's such a, like you said, like, it's such a huge swing. And I think it works is the thing. Like, that shouldn't work, right? Like, it should feel totally out of place, and a lot of times when creators insert themselves into a piece of their own writing, sometimes it feels gimmicky or weird, or at least, like a hard pill to swallow. But I feel like this movie did it in a way that from, minute one, I was sold on the concept.
Yeah, it really, and again, like, I just keep thinking, like, 1994, like, nowadays we're pretty saturated with meta cleverness, I feel like shows like Community, that, like, there's so many different media that have done the meta thing, but this was really early on, and the way that it does seamlessly blend in with the other films is really cool, and especially literally, like, when in the end, when John Sexton's character, like, just slowly becomes Nancy's dad, and the badge appears, and it's really eerie and surreal. And I think that's another thing that this movie does well, is the surreal, dreamy set pieces, like the grave scene, feel like they're balanced in a way that feels like they're actual nightmares. I appreciate like some of the sequels, how kind of phantasmagorical they've become. But this one kind of regrounds it in like, oh, this feels like an actual nightmare that I've had, of like going under the covers and then I'm in this labyrinth kind of chute going down into the depths kind of thing, which is it makes it scarier for sure.
Yeah. So actually along those lines, I have to say I'm curious. Are there like films in this particular series that you like or, you know, ones that you notably dislike? Because I have a very strong, like, I like 3 Nightmare movies, and I really don't like the rest of them.
Yeah, I can probably guess which ones those are. I definitely, for me, 4, 5, and Freddy's Dead, which is 6, right, are the kind of the forgettable ones that all blur together for me.
100% agree.
Yeah, and the first one, iconic, incredible. Part 3, Dream Warriors, is I might say it's my favorite. Yeah, I think it's hard.
Just say
hard
it's
not
fine.
to. It is.
It is the best one
because it really crystallizes the concept in a way and balances out the fun and the terror and it's just it's the best. But I also do have a soft spot for part 2, and even though it is a much maligned entry in the series, it also probably was also a big influence on Curse the Reaper in terms of like the character is trying to like inhabit someone in a visceral way, and there's just a few effects in that one that are fun, but it's more, you know, 1 and 3 are for me the top tier, and this one, New Nightmare, like, I really appreciate it and respect it, and also like it's not one that I revisit often. It's just something that I'm really glad exists and was really inspiring to me. But the first one and the third one are the ones that have the most like rewatch value, I think, for me.
Okay, yeah, basically, almost exactly like the same opinions. This is a delight. People like to argue with me about how 4 is worthwhile, and I think that they're crazy. But yeah, like to me, you know, 1 is a really solid horror movie across the board. 3, takes the idea and just turns it up to 11 and really just goes where you want it to go, and continues the story of our first character too. You know, with Nancy coming back in an interesting new way, and then New Nightmare, you know, brings it all back again. And like to me, I agree. Like there are things about 2 that I do appreciate, though I think it was largely a misstep for the series.
Right.
But you know, I appreciate things about it for sure. But yeah, like 4, 5, and 6, you could just throw those reels in a scrapper, and I don't think the world would be any worse off without them.
There's some great set pieces, like the cockroach killing is probably one of my favorite in the whole franchise. So, you know, I do think there's some amazing effects work and set pieces, but in terms of like standalone films with stories that really are memorable, they kind of blur together. And that's something I also, with Curse the Reaper, really wanted to lean into with there are script segments throughout the book of the entire Night of the Reaper franchise, all 8 films, and I intentionally wanted to play with that, the way that Nightmare and Friday the 13th and Halloween franchises, like every new entry has to kind of one up the mythology and add some weird new element, and you know, the Dream Child and the Dream Warriors and the telekinetic teenager fighting Jason, or move them to Manhattan, and to me, like there's just a delight in the way that these franchises keep having to like figure out a new angle, but I feel like Nightmare, out of all of them, doesn't really do a ton of that. It's that's why for me, like 4, 5, and 6 kind of blur together, because I'm like, they don't really stand out mythology wise.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, going back to Curse of the Reaper, those segments, often just like the things that you would mention in terms of like how they had to up themselves, just was an utter delight as a horror fan to just be like, oh yeah, no, they totally would do that insane thing in the 7th entry in this series, because why not? So yeah, like very funny at times, which was great because. There's a lot of darkness, but there's also a lot of humor in that book. So,
thank you. Yeah, the humor was important to me, and definitely the Reaper was most influenced by Freddy out of all the slashers in terms of being a kind of pun-loving slasher. But yeah, interesting with New Nightmare that I feel like Wes Craven was trying to come back to a darker, scarier version of Freddy. I think he was pretty infamously not thrilled with the way that he kind of became a jester character. And wanted to bring that darkness back. But there are still some one-liners and jokes in here, which makes sense because there were in the first one as well. He always had like a sense of humor from the beginning.
Yeah, and honestly, I liked the way that this movie balanced it probably almost better than any other Nightmare film. Just because, because the humor was really mean too.
Yes,
which really worked for me.
So when he says I think the big set piece in this is the hospital scene with Julie, the babysitter, which kind of recreates the Tina kill from the first film. And his one-liner there is, "You ever play Skin the Cat?" Which does that mean anything to you? Is that a game you're familiar with? I had to Google it and try to figure out what exactly that one-liner was even referencing.
I mean, I think it's I'm like very tangentially aware of it being like a game, like a children's game, but I don't know. I think culturally that's kind of more of a thing from the South, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I saw that it was like a gymnastics move from like the raised ring bells where you flip backwards and flip forwards again. I was like, is it that, or is it a commentary on "there are many ways to skin a cat" phrase, which is like, is that a meta commentary on redoing Tina's death scene and skinning the cat differently this time? I was like, I wonder.
I think it is an actual like name of a children's game, but and I'm sure it's kind of more along the lines of Red Rover or Kick the Can or something, but just the fact that it's called that is honestly horrifying.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, what thing in childhood, once you look at it as an adult, isn't horrifying?
Yes. And yeah, I think, and that scene is my favorite kind of look for Freddy in this film. Like, we see him a few times before that, but that's the first time we see him with the trench coat and the green fedora, I think. Mm-hmm. And it's just it's a pretty badass look. I think the makeup effect on the hand is a little iffy, but I appreciate, again, that they were trying to do something different. And I noticed this time watching it that his pants are like black, shiny pleather, which was an interesting choice.
Well, this is the rock and roll Freddy.
Exactly. He's I think he's wearing like Doc Martens when he's climbing on the ceiling. He's rocking it.
Yeah, he I imagine just was going to chase this down with forming a grunge band, so.
Yes. I'd go see Freddy and the Krugers.
I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Considering that I'm a, fedora wearing Doc Marten kind of guy myself.
That's true. It's a good look.
I mean, I like it, obviously. Yeah. So, before we go too far down the rabbit hole on Freddy's aesthetic, which I agree does look really good for this film, at least his outfit. But I do have some comments later on in the podcast about maybe the burned skin effect. But I do just kind of want to spend a little bit more time on this idea of meta horror. Like, why do you think meta? Wow. Okay, been talking too long today. Why do you think that meta horror is so appealing? Why do you think we are drawn as an audience to this self-referential, way of storytelling in general, but specifically why it's become so ingrained into the horror genre specifically?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting. I feel like I haven't really thought too much about it in this context of you don't see a lot of meta. I feel like meta horror is a really specific subgenre in a way that you don't really see a lot of meta comedies. There are comedies where people are making movies, but and there are comedies that are parodies, but
or breaking the fourth wall, but that's
Yes, that to me is different. I feel like the thing about meta horror has to do with the suspension of disbelief and the way that horror, we are consciously kind of practicing and playing with fear, and it's a safe space to do it with a horror movie, right? Mm-hmm. But meta horror, I feel is trying to be okay, but what if we told you we were in on that joke and we know that this is just a movie and we're going to show you behind the scenes, but then we're going to pull the rug out from under you again to say that you're still not safe, kind of on the other side of the meta-ness of it all. I think that has something to do with it, that there's a layer of kind of stripping away another layer of safety to a certain degree, kind of like the Blair Witch of it all, of playing with reality.
Yeah, and I definitely agree, and I like that you bring up found footage there too, because whatever we can do to kind of bring us one step closer, that I think that is often something that horror fans look for, because you do kind of get used to a baseline that maybe your standard moviegoer might not be ready for, but you've seen it, you've seen how the effects work too. I think a lot of times horror fans are really interested in how did they do that? How did they do that special effect? Maybe more so than we get in a lot of other fan communities. And so once you start to see how the sausage is made, then then we can spend time telling stories about it when that goes wrong, and turn that into the new horror. And also I think it might be partially a response to how maligned horror often is, right? Whenever there's some shooting or anything like that, there's going to be at least a couple of talking heads on cable news saying, well, is this horror movie's fault?
Right. Yep.
And I like that this is able to make comments about sometimes people do just think that the people who watch horror movies are a bunch of sickos. What if they're in fact a maybe loving community, which I find to be the case, and instead it can be what is it like to have the people who are making it encounter bad things? Or I just watched Scream with my wife the other night too, and what if it just makes the psychopaths more creative rather than making psychopaths? Right. That's what I like, because again, people like to give people wide berth once they hear, oh, you write horror or you like horror. So I don't know. I think there's definitely a part of that that's just so baked into society that meta horror emerging from that makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true, and I think that there's something. I agree. I've only encountered. I mean, I should rephrase that. There are certainly horror. There's toxic fandom in horror, as there is in anything, but especially I've in connecting through StokerCon with horror fiction writers, and there's just so much love for the genre, for each other, support, and also just people who are clearly working their stuff out creatively in ways that I think is way better than people who are just repressing every every dark feeling that they've ever had, and not reckoning with the fact that we all do have a shadow side, and what do we want to do with that. I think that horror creates a nice outlet for playing with that, and also for dealing with, you know, the ultimate fear of mortality and death, and just, you know, that can be looming over all of us, but it gives us that opportunity to kind of look it in the eyes and not, you know, that's what the first nightmare is all about, right? Is like, I'm not afraid of you. I'm going to look you in the face, Krueger, and tell you you're shit. Like, it's a great metaphor.
Yeah. And that just continues to come through, you know, very clearly with New Nightmare.
Yes. Yeah. There's a really nice callback to Nancy's strength, that comes kind of full circle with this film.
So what are some other things that you especially liked about this film?
I think I enjoyed the concept of the husband dying so early. Struck me this time especially, because I think when I haven't revisited a film in a while, I try to watch it with fresh eyes. And even though I did remember that, I didn't remember it happening so soon. And I thought that was a really nice, and I wonder if that was also, you know, a kind of Psycho throwback moment intentionally, or you know, a preface to Scream calling back to Psycho, but it really is an unexpected thing. It feels like they're kind of setting up a family drama thing. And usually in a movie like this, the husband would be the person being like concerned about his wife, and instead they kill him off pretty quickly. And but they bring in kind of John Sexton, the father character from the original film, to kind of play that role. It's interesting the way that it plays in that way. And yeah, I think I just appreciated that it was a bit more of a slow burn. I do think that at times a little bit too slow of a slow burn, but I liked that there was more kind of implied violence building up to the kind of climactic scene in the hospital, and just getting to see these real people from behind the scenes of the movie, from Robert Englund to Wes Craven to Bob Shaye, and of course Heather Langenkamp and John Sexton. It was just, there's a fun to it that just feels, again, like, I just feel like Wes Craven's presence in it. And I think also watching it, you know, after he's passed, has added a new layer to it for me of just like, God, I love him and everything that he gave us. Like, it's all baked into this movie, so that makes it special for me too. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and going back to the killing the husband, I thought that was especially such a smart move, because I mean, you know, that Wes was really, you know, pulling a lot from Heather Langenkamp's real life, right? You know, her real husband, in fact, does do special effects and stuff like that, and so, you know, killing what is essentially, you know, a real person in this horror movie was a bold move, and it really, I like how the stakes were suddenly so high, because it's like, oh, if he's willing to, you know, kill off the you know, equivalent to a real human being in this movie, then yeah, this kid is in big trouble.
Yeah, there's the kid element is totally kind of new and different for this franchise as well. And there were times when it was like, it felt kind of like Omen-esque, like the playground scene, which I honestly have mixed feelings about. But again, I'm kind of like I appreciate that he's just kind of playing around with different subgenres. And I actually noticed this time, like the scene when the kid goes running across the highway, the music cues are totally cribbed from Terminator 2, Judgment Day. Like it has that blue look, and I'm like, oh, this came out a few years after, and I feel like maybe Wes Craven was kind of itching to do a little bit of that big truck action stuff, because like that clanking score from T2 was kind of playing. So there are moments that for me in this film that are both kind of odd and ill-fitting, but also those are the parts that I love, because I'm just like, this is weird to have in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But there's a great visual there when he looks back and sees all of the Freddys coming up against the fence. That's super creepy.
Oh yeah, like moments like that really worked shockingly well. And also, I really love a lot of the set design. Like, Freddy's lair looked incredible in this movie. With, like, the giant Freddy head that's like a waterfall, and...
It's beautiful. And the scene leading up to that, you know, the slide effect was maybe my favorite. Like, this is when she's going under the covers to go find him, and it turns into kind of a slide through, like, almost like a ventilation shaft, and it's getting more and more grungy, and then, yeah, as you said, spits her out of this giant ornate Freddy mouth like a big water slide, and it's so over the top and wonderful, and it's just like, yep, we're just going there.
Yeah, it really just made this movie feel as big and bold as it really is. Another thing that I really liked is the way that it actually used some very interesting and convenient real life earthquake damage. So one of the first guests that we ever had on the podcast was someone who was actually an assistant director on this film. And he only talked about it a little bit because we were actually mostly talking about Hereditary, interestingly. And then, you know, he just started telling us cool stories about working with Wes Craven. And yeah, I guess while they were filming, there was in fact just a real earthquake. And so Wes just, you know, turned to a bunch of the camera guys and said, well, I'm just going to stop filming today, and you guys are just going to go film real damage all around, you know, this area of California, because we don't have to spend budget on that now, and it's going to look 100 times better because it's real earthquake damage. Go get out there now. So
yep.
I just love that, you know, he was willing to do things like that too, and really just kind of, you know, work with the tools that in this case, you know, almost seem like divine intervention on his behalf.
Yes. That's a real, like, extra meta layer, right? Of like, I actually also just loved and I remember that from I had watched the Never Sleep Again documentary, which is like a 6 or 7 hour documentary, just all behind the scenes of every Nightmare movie. And I remember learning it from that. That was like, holy shit, this is actual earthquakes that happened that they just incorporated. But I do love, and I assume this was actually just created on the set, not just casual earthquake damage. The like cracks in the wall looking like Freddy's slashes. Was just a beautiful image to kind of organically bring his presence in.
Oh yeah, I absolutely love that. Just, you know, whenever it's just, you know, in the background, you're like, oh yeah, Freddy's here. You know, yeah. It's a good way to give us the presence of the character without even having to show him.
Yeah.
Are there any other things that you want to kind of bring up in terms of like what really worked for you in the film before we switch gears over to things that maybe didn't work quite as well?
I don't think so. I kind of already mentioned, like, I dug John Sexton's character and the way that really trippy transition happens when it's the actor trying to comfort Heather, and then he calls her Nancy, and he turns around and he's got his badge, and you're just like, oh fuck, we're just fading into the movie. It was I really enjoyed that moment.
Oh yeah, it felt so dreamy in a way that, yeah, a lot of the sequels before this didn't. You know,
right.
I like the dream logic that Wes Craven creates, you know, in the films that he was more directly involved with, which is incidentally, yeah, the three that I think both of us like the best. And so, you know, yeah, when he really plays with that dream logic and kind of how it blurs and transitions from one thing to another, with that as probably one of the pinnacle moments of that, yeah, Wes Craven knows what he's doing, or knew what he was doing, I should say. R.I.P.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. He just was very intentional, and just like thoughtful. You can tell that he really cared, and by all accounts, like, that's how he was with his actors and everyone on set. Like, he was just a really warm, and like we talked about, those are the horror people who like are just delightful humans.
Man, I love being in the horror community.
It's the best, just the best.
Okay, well, on that delightful warm fuzzy note, let's move into things we didn't like as much. So yeah, the first thing I want to bring up, and you already kind of touched on this, is that yes, sometimes the pacing was a little too slow.
Yeah, I think for me it was especially in the hospital, the kind of, like, I like the idea of people not believing Nancy and thinking she's a bad mother. That really, I thought, resonated well, but I feel like they leaned a little too much into that sort of manufactured sort of drama with the nurses who are just kind of angrily trying to sedate her son. Yeah, I feel like
intensely illegal.
Yes. I was like, this feels a little too like Nurse Ratchety. But I think, yeah, so I think, this movie, I think, clocks in at like an hour and 50 minutes, and I think it could have been closer to 90 minutes and been a bit more efficient. But yeah, the hospital, as I said, also had my favorite kind of set piece moment in it. I just think that, yeah, elements around it might have been trimmed a little.
Yeah, we didn't maybe need to have the head nurse, going, now, has he seen your films? Like 40 times, maybe?
Yeah, there were like 2 or 3 full scenes kind of repeating the same kind of energy. I was like, could just do one.
Yeah, so that definitely, seemed to be... I guess, certain scenes really just kind of were driving home the same ideas too many times, especially in the hospital. And also, for me, I just felt like certain scenes, like Nancy slowly walking through her house, kind of leading up to her going down the bed slide. I felt like that scene was maybe like twice as long as it needed to be. I just feel like, it lost a lot of steam really late in the game, which is the wrong time to lose any steam.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because the slow boil of like slowly alluding to Freddy, I think, really works well, but then right when it's building towards a peak, it kind of treads water a little bit too much. And the like piecing together the burnt pieces of paper that say answer the phone wasn't as scary. Like it felt like there were a couple of kind of just swing and miss moments for me of like, oh, is that what we were building to? But yeah, it's kind of, that's a tough wire to walk, I think, sometimes with the slow burn element.
The next thing that maybe didn't work as well for me was one element of the Freddy look. I agree that, like, his costuming, loved it, but to me, this version of Freddy, how his skin looks specifically, felt very rubber masky. Like, I don't know, it seems like it is a very, very good mask to buy at for Spirit Halloween, but it didn't feel like Freddy. Like, it didn't seem like a dude who had been burned or anything like that. The places that his face is damaged are a little too perfectly edged and stuff like that. And so that kind of always throws me out a little bit, because it just felt too designed as opposed to organic.
Yeah, I think that's a good point and a good way of phrasing it. It does kind of look like one of those masks. And I think also he's wearing contact lenses that kind of jumped out at me. There's, it's interesting because I feel like Freddy and his makeup from the previous films are so iconic that he just, like, even when Robert Englund emerges on the talk show as Freddy, I really felt, I was like, oh fuck, there's Freddy. Oh, it's just like, it's him. So then to get the kind of deluxe Spirit Halloween version was kind of like, oh, this actually, I understand why you're trying to say, hey, it's not that silly Freddy anymore. It's a darker, more real version. But it actually had the opposite effect for me, where I was like, it feels more manufactured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that captures it perfectly. It's the weird inversion of what they were going for.
Yeah.
And it's a shame too, because like I think Englund's performance as Freddy is the best in this movie over any other film that he's done.
Yeah, it's a really scary performance, as you said. He's like much more mean spirited, and like the way that he moves and engages with the characters on the screen feels much more threatening.
Mm-hmm. The only other thing that I had that didn't work for me was just that there are a number of characters, the son specifically, but also just some of the minor characters who just felt very wooden in their performances. I just felt like, there were some people reading off of a, sign being held up by someone behind the camera of what their lines were, which kind of threw me out because I think, it felt so drastically different, in contrast to how good Heather Langenkamp is, and how good Robert Englund is, and how good, even, Bob Shea is, and stuff like that. Like, it just, I don't know, it felt weird how there were some people who just seemed to be people reading off of a teleprompter when it's supposed to be the real world.
Yeah, it's interesting because like there's a degree to which that could work in a meta situation, but it feels like the wrong moments are when that happens, when it's supposed to be more grounding and be like, no, this is the real world. This is not, the fading into, like we talked about with the actor becoming the cop dad, where it's like, oh, it's becoming the movie. There are moments where it's supposed to be more grounded, where it's a little creaky performance-wise.
Yeah, it's, at New Line offices, and someone is just, oh, hi, Heather. You're like,
yeah. Oh, hi, Mark. Yep.
Was there anything else that kind of stood out to you as far as maybe things that didn't work as well in New Nightmare?
I love conceptually the kind of jumping off point of the mythology of it all. I do feel like it gets a little convoluted and a little unclear, like I mentioned, with the kind of like Omen vibes with the kid trying to reach God on the playground, and then is he trying to possess the boy? And then Wes says that the entity is concerned with the murder of innocents, and so Heather's kind of the gatekeeper between our world and his, and he's trying to get her at her weakest point, which is her son. It just it became a little bit convoluted for me as to what the Freddy demon thing is actually trying to do, and what each kind of manifestation means, and the kind of going in and out of dream world of it all. But to a certain degree, I could also argue that that's part of the charm of you don't really know what the hell's happening in this movie, and you're in Heather's shoes in that regard.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I do feel like, maybe Wes knew a little bit too much too clearly in terms of, when she actually talks to him. Oh, well, he is this demon, and he has existed for a long time, and just all of this very specific information that yes, he's writing the script for the movie in the movie, but also it does feel a little weird that he would know this much information about something that is kind of outside him.
Right.
And I don't know. I think he overcomplicated it, right? He could have just said, enough people believe in Freddy, now Freddy's real.
Right.
Instead of, well, there's this demon, and throughout all of time, it has, taken the fears of humanity. I'm like, I don't know. We're getting a little too esoteric here. Let's just kind of keep it pure and simple. Enough people believe in something, it's now real.
Right. Yeah, which is a concept that makes sense. And yeah, it definitely, like I said, like this was a huge inspiration for Curse of the Reaper, and my kind of twist was to like focus on the actor who plays the monster and walk the line of, is it psychological or is there something supernatural? Like has this character taken on a life of its own from living through the film so much, and because this actor dedicated his life to it, and it's a hard line to walk, to find a balance of like, to give the audience enough to kind of piece things together, but not to kind of be over explanatory, but also to play with the meta of it all, that like a lot of these slashers do that moment of just like exposition dumps as to why the thing is back from the dead doing something different now, kind of thing. Yeah.
And you know, I think it's easy for us to, you know, now that we've seen so many other examples of meta horror, to kind of be like, oh yeah, maybe he didn't stick the landing on that element. Though, yeah, to give Wes, you know, his due here, he, you know, was really kind of kicking off a meta horror renaissance that, you know, yeah, other people have had a lot more practice being able to figure out kind of where that line is in terms of what information do we need to convey to make the meta horror work.
That's very true. Yeah. Again, this is like almost 30 years ago now, which is wild to me.
Yeah, this is such a, you know, groundbreaking movie that no one even seems to remember a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's a great title too. Right. I love that. Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Like it, even the title is meta. And I did like that line of dialogue when she's talking to Wes, and she's like, "Well, what happens in the screenplay?" And he's like, "It's not really a screenplay so much as it is like a nightmare." Like his experience of it is like transcribing a nightmare. And I'm like, yeah, this is actually the title.
Yeah. And that, dang it, Wes Craven is just too good at what he does, honestly.
Yep. Yeah. This is making me want to go revisit a bunch of other movies too.
Yeah. Now I just want to have a Scream marathon and just watch a bunch of his other stuff too, because Wes Craven.
So good.
All right. So to kind of wrap up our discussion of New Nightmare, let's go over how we rate the film. So we will be rating it by screams, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how scary is this movie? And crowns, so 1 to 10, how good of a movie is it in your, you know, professional opinion? So I'll go first with screams. I give it a 4. I don't feel like any of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are especially good at like getting under my skin in a way that haunts me. Like I love watching them because they're fun, and yeah, like this one, oh, you know, it scratches that like writer's brain that I have of, oh yes, this is how storytelling is constructed, and oh, that's a really interesting idea. But yeah, it didn't really scare me. So I gave it a 4.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, it's not a viscerally scary movie. It's more of like an intellectually scary movie. It's like, if you think about it, it's a scary idea. Mm-hmm. But as far as the actual execution, you know, there are definitely a couple moments that are unsettling. I guess I'd give it a 5. Yeah, I'll give it a 5.
All right. And then crowns-wise, I give this movie an 8. Maybe it's just because I really, really like, you know, Wes Craven and meta horror, and you know, just like how bold this movie is. But I really love this movie. It's it's, maybe not, breaking into like my favorite horror movies of all time, but it really is a lot of fun. So yeah, a solid 8 from me.
Yeah, I think this is a movie that as I think I mentioned, like I appreciate it and am so grateful for it more than I really
want to watch
for
it
me is like
times.
I think I'd probably land on like a 7 for this one. And the first film and the third film would definitely be north of that in terms of my go-to nightmares. But again, it's one where I just have like such a like a saccharine relationship with just like loving, because it's just such it's such a Wes Craven. There's a pureness of his expression in it that I really appreciate.
Absolutely. All right. So I guess kind of moving out of New Nightmare then, one thing that we like to do on the podcast is we like to share how we are staying spooky. So, sharing something that, in the horror world that we have read, watched, played, whatever, recently that, maybe stood out to you. And I can go first. I finally got around to watching the new Marvel technically feature-length film, in that it's like 55 minutes long, Werewolf by Night, and I freaking loved it. It's
Ooh.
Have you seen it?
I haven't, and I forgot. This is one where like I saw a couple people posting when it was released, and I was like, it was on my radar, and then it fell off my radar. So thank you for this reminder.
Yeah, no, I like can't recommend it highly enough, because it's definitely a movie that is both made for like people who like, comic book movies and stuff like that, yes, but also it is this love letter to like classic Universal horror. It's filmed in black and white. It's got so many set pieces and story elements that feel straight out of the Universal lot in 1930, and it's very fun. Like, the story takes some really great twists and turns. I was surprised at some of the things that they did, and yeah, it's just like a fun monster romp that absolutely delighted me. And basically, I'm just like, well, if this were a series, I would want 8 seasons of this right now. I could binge this. I was utterly smitten with it. It kind of came out of nowhere for me, and it's like, top tier, one of my favorite things that Marvel has done in the last 2 decades.
Oh, I'm so excited to watch it, because like the Wolfman is I love that character, and I'm not familiar with Marvel's riff on the Werewolf by Night character from the comics, but the cast is amazing, and the black and white kind of homage factor looks beautiful to me. And I also was just thinking the other day, I was like, I feel like I'm not getting my money's worth out of my Disney Plus subscription. I need to figure out more stuff to watch on there. And there it is.
Yeah, honestly, like if they had had nothing else, I would say like Werewolf by Night is the single thing that I have liked the most that on Disney Plus, in terms of their new content.
Awesome. Oh, I'm excited.
And I spend way too much time watching, superhero movies and stuff, so that's saying a lot.
Oh yeah, we did a whole rewatch of every Marvel movie during the pandemic. That was a phase I think a lot of people went through too.
Well, then you were just in for the best little treat here with Werewolf by Night. So
my staying spooky, we were talking earlier about horror novellas, and I've read one very recently called "This Is Where We Talk Things Out" by Caitlin Marceau, released by Darklit Press, and it is a shining example of why novella is a great format for a horror story. And I won't say anything too much about it other than just the setup is just a woman whose estranged mother wants to reconnect with her by taking her to a remote cabin in the snowy Canadian wilderness. As you know, only good things happen when people go to stay in remote houses in the wilderness. And it's just a really effective and efficient horror novella that really left a mark. It's This Is Where We Talk Things Out by Caitlin Marceau.
And adding that to my to-read list right now. Yeah, I definitely have been on a horror novella kick lately. Probably after reading A Lush and Seething Hell. Have you read anything by John Horner Jacobs?
I have not.
Oh. Read A Lush and Seething Hell.
Amazing. I'm adding it.
Like, one, that name for a collection is incredible. But the two novellas, one of them is called The Sea Dreams It Is the Sky, and the other one is My Heart Struck Sorrow. So,
Ooh.
Dude knows how to name stuff like nobody else. But the first one is this kind of very Lovecraftian look at this kind of like fictional South American country that's kind of recently been overthrown by a horrifying regime and stuff like that, like in like the 1950s. And so it's like trying to solve this mystery in a very Lovecrafty kind of way. And then My Heart Struck Sorrow is a folklorist who is kind of uncovering the story of a man, also in like the 1950s, who is going all over the American South trying to find the purest, most original version of this song about a man who fights the devil.
Oh.
And
yes.
as he gets closer to the original story, the more terrifying things become.
That sounds deeply unsettling and meta, if not meta adjacent.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
So both of those are just, in my opinion, like 10 out of 10 straight bangers. So highly recommend. And ever since then, I've just been on a insatiable horror novella kick. So.
Oh, awesome. I'm excited to check those out.
Yeah. See, I love doing this podcast because I get to give and receive recommendations all the time.
That's so good.
All right. Well, I guess let's kind of wrap things up. Where can people find you if they want to, hit you up online or anything like that?
You can find me I'm active on Instagram and Twitter at Brian McWriter. I may be convinced to join TikTok if Twitter keeps syncing as it seems to be. And my website is brianmcwriter.com. So there you will find links to Curse of the Reaper, some short stories and nonfiction that I've had published. But yeah, I'm on the socials. Love chatting with people, so please find me there.
And also, of course, please read Curse of the Reaper because it's freaking fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
Hey, I appreciate that you wrote it.
Oh, it's a joy. It's like you write the book that you want to read, and so having people read it and enjoy it, it's like, I mean, this is why we do what we do in the horror community, is to just celebrate the genre and the stories that we love in it.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, I don't think there's really anything else we have to cover, so I guess we can just kind of wrap things up by saying stay spooky.
Need even more Scream Kings? Here's our obligatory shameless social media plug. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Scream Kings Pod. You could also email us at screamkingspodcast@gmail.com. Help us reach a wider audience of horror fans by leaving a review on iTunes or by sharing a link on social media. You can also support the show by going to patreon.com/ScreamKings. Stay spooky.